I have the great pleasure of introducing you to our first keynote presenter, Judith E. Glaser. I'm just going to read a bit from her bio, and you can read more from the conference app. But more importantly, I wanted to share just some of my own personal connections with Judith. So Judith E. Glaser is an organizational anthropologist. Isn't that cool? Someone who's really trying to understand the very fabric of organizations. She is also a pioneer and an innovation, change agent, consultant, executive coach in the industry. And what I love about Judith's work is she grounds it in neurochemistry. And really thinking about, if you think about a person as a system, really looking at the whole person, head, heart, hand, metaphorically. And I really saw that work come together. Now, anyone who knows me knows I love books. And before Judith was brought to my attention, I actually didn't realize, but I had read one of her books. I had forgotten. And then I went to that book, and I had all kinds of conversations with Judith on the pages. So if you take a look at this book, and it's the first book that I read of yours, you will see that it's full of notes. This actually came before her book on Conversational Intelligence, but Judith, I had a conversation with you even before the book came out. So there it is. She and I have had the great pleasure of spending a couple of months together really thinking about the interplay, the intersection between conversational intelligence and this important work of systemic coaching in and for organizations. And I'm going to join her actually on stage. We're going to welcome her in a moment. And we're going to have a kind of a conversation, but it's a structured conversation, to really take you through the journey that I've had the privilege of getting a window into this woman's amazing thinking and work. So, ladies and gentlemen, please welcome to the stage Judith E. Glaser. So first I'm going to ask Judith to say a little bit about her story. If you can just forward a couple of the slides. Keep going. Keep going. Oops, the other way, sorry. Forward. There we go. The other forward. There you go.
Okay.
Keep going. One more.
I'm going to do a personal story first.
Yeah, in one second. So she's going. So you're going to see us.
My energy for
You're
getting
going to see us dance, and I already see how this is going. You're going to see us dance, and I promised that I would follow her lead, and I broke the rule already. But just to give you a quick flavor, she is going to tell a personal story, so that is the personal journey. Yeah, into it. But here's the good part of this three-part conversation we're going to have. Her foundation is really neurochemistry, making the invisible visible. Isn't that cool? Making the invisible. How do we tap into what we're not even aware is happening in our mind and in the mind of our clients? She's going to introduce us to 5 conversational essentials. And what I love about a solid scholar and practitioner, they don't leave it at the theoretical level. She's going to talk about her conversational dashboard that really operationalizes those 5 conversational essentials and how it links to neurochemistry. So I don't know about you, but I'm so excited about this conversation. So Judith, the first story is...
I need to know, how many of you are curious at this point? Wonderful. You just gave me a shot of oxytocin. You know what oxytocin is? Okay. So there's 2 chemicals that go back and forth in the brain and create uncertainty all the time. But they happen. I'm going to talk about when they happen, how they happen, and how you can actually make them happen, the good ones. So cortisol is what causes fear, and we feel it back here in the lower part of the brain. And so if somebody says something about us that you've heard and it's not nice, you'll connect that cortisol to that person. The brain is very mathematical. And so for every person you meet, there's a dot. The dot has next to it all the patterns of either oxytocin or cortisol. And so how many of you have met somebody that somehow seems to kind of give you one of those weird glances all the time? You know what it means, but you think that they don't like you. You've had that happen. Yeah. Is there anybody here that hasn't had that happen? Okay, I want to meet you. All right, so that's the cortisol. Then there's oxytocin, which is what we want up here in the prefrontal cortex. The prefrontal cortex was discovered. This light is really, woof.
It is. It's very
Maybe I'll just, this way is like 2 inches is better.
Little dance.
So cortisol, oxytocin is what causes people to want to connect with each other. And when it's up here in this part of the brain, it actually opens up what we discovered only 1990s is the prefrontal cortex. We used to think that the neocortex, which is where we have knowledge, up here, is what is everything. So the more I know, the more I learn, the more I can look good, the more I tell people what's important, is this part of the brain. But it's not the part that creates engagement and opens up wisdom and integrity. And I'll show you a slide of all the things you get when you open up this part of the brain, the prefrontal cortex and the heart. That's when people connect. That's when innovation occurs. And so it's these two chemicals, cortisol and oxytocin, that we want to talk about today throughout this whole session so that you can intentionally, in fact, I want you to do an exercise. You have to be sitting next to somebody. Everybody needs a partner. So, there you go. Yeah.
They do that very well.
They're great coaches.
Yeah, they do that very well.
Yeah. So I want to have you do this is your partner, and you might end up with 4 people, but what I'd like to do is turn to your partner. Shake their hand. Look them in the eye. Look at them. Now this is, you got to take that space away from you. It's right there. Look them in the eye. Now here's the action. Yeah, just okay. Now what I have to move forward. Okay. Why do I have to? Head it back into the light. Or I'm getting back for it.
How many people does it take to fix the light?
This is what not working.
There you go. The light bulb has to want to change. There you go. Good on top.
Okay, so the most important part of the exercise, shake the hand, look them in the eyes, because each action I'm giving you is doing something to shift your chemistry. And then share something you've never shared before with anyone. Okay, so did you have a chance to connect with each other?
Yes.
You have good stories, interesting things? Awesome. What you did is you opened a pathway for intimacy with that person. And the next time the two of you get together, you will have established a pattern. So if the person's name is here, and that pattern was a good experience, that's what's going to start you off with that person. And again, the brain connects and collects all of these experiences. They're mathematical. And if you have a bunch that are really good, you do what's called priming before you even meet that person. Your brain is now primed, and you think, oh God, the last course time together was so terrific. I can't wait for another one. And that's how we do it for all human beings. So there's never a neutral. Once we meet somebody, we establish a pattern. That pattern is either repeated or changed. And you have the ability, especially as coaches, and I'm just looking at some of your bios and seeing how, I'm in awe that you're here listening to me. It only took me half a century to figure this stuff out. So, I'm glad to be able to be here and share and discover with all of you and give you things, hopefully, to be curious about, take back, and want to explore and do differently. Does that sound like a good idea for today? Okay, not every hand went up, so how about all the other hands? We have a lot. Okay, thank you. Again, remember, every time you do that, I'm getting oxytocin. So, the more, if you didn't ever raise your hand with some of my questions, my brain would literally go down here and say, oh my God, what am I going to do with this audience? I'm going to work with what I planned, but let me share some things with you. Do you like stories?
Yes.
Do you like personal stories? Okay, so let me tell you the first personal story. When I was 11 years old, we lived in a house, and there was a basement, and I hadn't really explored the basement, but there was a place where there were lots of things on shelves. And one day I went over to take a look at what was in the shelf, and I found a scrapbook. And the scrapbook was my father's, and it showed my father in a tutu. It showed my father doing something with, what was he doing? Most of all, it was the tutu that got me, I have to tell you. As important. And what I discovered, I went to my dad and I said, what are these? It's a tutu. It says that you were the head of the debating team. It had pictures of you doing things. What is all this? You've never told us. He said, there's a lot of things I've never told you. This is where shame comes in. It turns out that my dad was born a twin. His sister had water on her brain. My dad was told by my grandmother that she didn't want boys, she only wanted girls. Imagine. And his sister was only lived until she was 5 years old because the water on the brain, and she passed away. And so now my father was left with that his mother didn't want boys. What would that feel like? Can anybody think of a word that would describe that? I mean, it's just unbelievable. And so my father decided that he was going to find a way to help himself. He was a stutterer at this point, and he stuttered through 10th grade. And he had a teacher who was a coach who came to him, and this is why, to me, coaching is the most important thing in the world. The coach said, I'm going to help you speak, but he said, I can't talk. And she said, I'm going to help you. You know the King's Speech story. And so she taught my father how to speak without stuttering. So coaching to me is the most important thing in the world. And so my father went on to be an ambassador to the United States, bringing dentistry around the world because a coach helped him learn how to speak. Imagine the difference in his life, what it would have been if he didn't have that. So I honor all of you for whoever you coach, whose lives you change, because it makes all the difference in the world. So what's next for me?
Mouth? No, you can't. I'll be explicit though. So this is what happens when you're trying to manage the conference and also be on stage. So I didn't notice until just now that there are not wireless mics in either aisle, and we need that for the Q&A. So I'm left you for a moment, but I'm back. So where we are is clicking forward. Yep. More. And the personal story.
Yep.
Which I think
So now, yep. So 2 more stories. So that was my story. That was my story of getting into this, and the fact that I saw my father become an ambassador to the United States, bringing dentistry around the world, having not been able to do it in his ever wildest imagination, was an empowering story that said, coaching is phenomenal. I need to understand it, and I need to be one. So, well, many of you have incredible degrees from so many different areas and spaces. Bring those degrees and bring the knowledge, but also leave space. Creating space is the most important thing, and creating safe space. I have research here that came from Google in a big project that was done about what is the environment that's best for human beings when they want to work together and be together. They reviewed 50 years of research on teams and studied 180 teams. Imagine the amount of work that was done. And there was one thing that they came up with that is the most important in the world for you to know about, for us to set in this room and for us to practice. Does anybody have any guess of what that one thing is that was more important? Yeah, in the back.
Psychological safety.
Psychological safety. Did you read the same article I read?
That's my doctoral research too. Done.
Oh my God, so you give us any special advice? It's psychological safety more than anything else. And what does that look like? How could you translate that? Can people hear your voice?
Yes, what it looks like is in on a team, an environment that is safe for people to give each other feedback, critical constructive feedback, and it's not, and that can be mutual attention. be back and forth, could be an argument, but at the end of the day, they trust, respect, and love each other when they step away. And as a result of that, the teams learn and adapt and perform better. So there's a great alignment that goes, you lose psychological safety when teams get to cohesive. They go into group challenge.
So can people grab, is it loud enough? Because it's, no, if we don't, I don't think we have a mic for that.
We're getting it. It's coming. It's coming.
It's coming, okay. Yep. But it takes the judgment out. It takes the part that people are sitting there saying, oh, something bad is going to happen, I'm not good enough, all those kinds of things. Either we mentalize it or it comes out of the way the person is actually talking to us. Yeah. Yep. And is there another way to call, what, other than feedback, is there another word that we could call that? That, yes, I know there's a, whoops. You can speak loud.
Insight. Say more.
So it's called insight, not feedback. Insight. Open. It doesn't have the judge part sitting in there. Yeah, and you're learning something new. Insight is new, something new, and it doesn't have negative judgment connected to it. Right. I hope that that's part of what I heard.
That's exactly right.
Okay, good. All right. So we're setting. This room is now a place for insight to take place. Yes. Okay. I wanted to tell you another story. This happened. So remember that I started to play with this when I was 11, discovering that there was something that changed my dad's life. So it's been a long-term putting things together. And what I'm going to be sharing today is a methodology that things started to all of a sudden come together and can be shared with all of you. I got a phone call after I did an immersion. Immersion is where I talk about my work. I do that for WVETS. And I got a call from a woman and she said, I was just listening to your immersion and I think you can help me. And I said, I'd be glad to help you. Who are you? And she said her name. And I said, what do you do? And she said, well, I have an MBA from Harvard. I'm a coach. I coach boards. But I heard something that might help my daughter. And I said, well, tell me more about the situation. She said, well, my daughter, we've been living on a farm with horses and so forth. My daughter doesn't talk a lot. And we're trying to figure out what the problem is. And so she used the word problem. So I'm listening to the words she's using, what she's choosing to say. And I said, well, what's going on with your daughter? And she said, we just don't know. And I said, well, I'm going to give you an experiment. And I'd like you to call me after you do and tell me what happens. And I said, what I'd like you to do with your daughter is that I would like you to have a conversation with her. But I'd like you to do three things. Create a safe space, which we just talked about. And she said, what does that mean? And it says, when your conversation is going on with her, listen to connect, not judge or reject. And she said, you mean my daughter might be picking that up? And I said, absolutely. In 0.07 seconds, and I'll show you a slide on this, that we can pick up another person's judgment that is in their head as we're talking with them. If they're non-judgmental, we'll feel that as well. 0.07 seconds is not very much time, but we can do it. And I said, so what I'd like to do is create a safe space, listen to connect, not judge or reject, and only ask questions for which you have no answer. And she said, I've never heard of these things before. And I said, yes, that's why I want you to try the experiment. And so she did, and she called me back the next day, and I said, what happened? And she said, a different person showed up. I said, what do you mean? She said, my daughter started to talk to me in a way that she had never talked to me before. I said, that's because you were setting the conditions. You were creating the environment. You were creating a safe psychological space for her to speak up. And so automatically she was able to do it. But when that judgment is there, it can close down and lock down the person from connecting, even your own daughter. And so for 4 days, she did the same practices with her child. And she called me back at the end of the 4 days and she said, I have never experienced my child this way. She was in tears, sharing gratitude for what it did to change what the child brought out of her and had in her that she didn't know how to create space for. Does that make sense? Yeah. Is that little helpful because I want to make sure that every story that I tell, it gives you some idea for something that you can do, and that's great. Then I want to tell a story. So I started to do this work in China and in South Africa and going around to different countries, and I went to Dubai, and I was not supposed to be the keynote speaker, but the person that was had a heart attack, so for whatever reason there were 8 of us and they picked me, and I was a little bit nervous, not thinking that's what I was going to be doing at the conference. And so at the end of my talk, and I talked about the neuroscience of conversations, and people were being translated. We had a translator in the back, and when I talked about power, I remember the guy stopped at one point, one of the top 100 people was in the audience, and he said, power. Now, in Dubai, power is really important, and power was not necessarily something that women had as much as what men had, and so we had that conversation. But anyway, what was most interesting in the Dubai story is at the end of my talk, someone came over to me and he bowed. And I, not knowing that the convention was not handshaking, was told, no, I can't shake your hand, but I would like to share something with you. And I said, what is that? And he said, thank you for translating the Koran into neuroscience. Imagine that. That was my biggest takeaway from that, because I realized there's a universality of what we're learning today, what you know as coaches. I want to honor what you know, and I want to add some things that you might be able to take away and learn and add to your repertoire. Is there anything in particular that you hoped that I would talk about today? So it could be anything. It could be anything? Okay, awesome.
You have the hard lunch.
Hard blood. Okay, so this is something that came out of the work that I was doing, and it helped me because when I put the word greatness, getting to the next level of greatness, how many of you wake up in the morning and say, oh, I want this to be the worst day I've ever had? Good, no, that's good, right? So I said, if getting to the next level is greatness, what does greatness look like? Okay, greatness depends on the quality of the culture, which depends on the quality of relationships, which depends on the quality of conversations. And so 35 years ago, when people were saying, come in and work on our culture, I said, what do you mean by culture? And at that time, McKinsey was doing the 7 S's, and somebody else was doing the whatever numbers, and I said, no, I think there's something here. It's not, the culture is made up of things, and so it depends on the quality of the culture, relationships, and conversations, and everything happens through conversations. And so when I got to that level, all of a sudden, my eyes and my thinking was going in a completely different direction. And I was looking at patterns, and this is a big takeaway. Some of you do it because you've studied so many different kinds of things. And what we look at are patterns that we can deconstruct. And those patterns tell us, if they're conversational patterns, what's going on in the culture. And so if you have a lot of push culture, for example, that's going to tell you what the leaders are doing that might be getting in the way of engagement, getting in the way of having their people be the voice of the culture as opposed to the leader being the voice of the culture. So there's so much that we are looking at and looking at. And here's a case study that it gives us light to what's going on because it's so simple to see what's happening. I got a call from one of the world's largest companies that is a producer of written content, and I can't mention their name, but they were looking for a CEO. This guy was the guy they were thinking about. He was already in the company. So it was a publishing company, actually, a global publishing company. So I said, okay, I'm going to take a look at this guy's behavior and see what's happening, because he's not going to be CEO if he does what he's doing. And so this is what he was doing. He put his head down as he was walking in the morning. He was very introvert. He was thinking about what was going to be the day's story that he had to work on, what the challenge was. And his people were coming in. And this is what they saw. And what do you think they thought when he was looking down and then looking up and then looking down and looking up? What might be going on that caused his people to say, I'm not happy with this guy's feedback to us? Now, he never specifically mentioned that he was talking to anybody, but what might these people be seeing that is common, that people pick up about other people quickly if they're worried or concerned? What is something? Yes? Pardon me? That he's very close, yep. And what else? There's another hand back here, yes.
Self-doubt.
He was what?
Self-doubt.
Left out. So they were thinking, when he looked up, that he was thinking about them because they made eye contact with him. What he was actually doing was thinking about the difficult challenges of the day, but he communicated to people that he was not happy with them because if he had a worry, the worry went to them, and they had no other way to figure it out for that. And so what I did is I coached him so that when he looks up at people when he's walking down the hall, just change his eye, make a connection, and let's see what happens when I interview them later. And that was the one thing. Eye contact is so important. The message we send in 0.07 seconds is so important. So let me show you what. So this is what we see. I hope that this clip works, the clicker to do. Yes, there we go. So in 0.7 seconds, first impressions. 0.07 seconds. In 0.07 seconds, trust is lost. And a voice could be lost. If that's all it takes, is 0.07 seconds. Look at the other side. That's called slow, but it's 0.1 seconds. That's where you have enough time to make a judgment, a conclusion. In 10 seconds, you can make a decision so that your brain processes things that quickly. What is new, it says 12 to 18 seconds. Listening goes inward. So we're out here and all of a sudden we're processing. We're out here and processing. What's new in the last year is that it's not 12 to 18 seconds. Because of the speed and everything that we do so fast, it is 0.6 or 7 seconds. 0.06 or 7 seconds, or 6 seconds. So that doesn't take 12 to 18 seconds to go inside. It's shorter than that because the speed of everything's happening. And so if this is going on around us while we're interacting with people, what can we do as coaches to stabilize the relationship, and what can we do to stabilize an environment? So we're going to get into some of those. Any questions? Yeah, voice is lost. Speak about that.
Yeah, what do you mean by when the voice is?
When a voice is lost.
When a voice is
Yeah, when a
lost.
voice is lost. So I have something that I wanted to say, but in just a short amount of time, my voice, I say I can't do it. I can't say it. I pick up the environment. I pick up the cues I'm getting, and it will stop me from expressing my voice. I fear something in my environment is going to not be good if I share something. Yeah, that's what that means. So at the moment of contact. So for so much time in history, it's been an I world or we world. If you go back and look and you say, well, for 50 years it's that hippie I world, or 50 years it's a very we world, or, there was this thing that I saw, this pattern. And I said, if that's a pattern, what if there's another pattern? And what if the pattern is not I or we, but I inside we? Where does the I fit inside the we? And the kind of research that's being done now, the limbic brain, it's our tribal brain, it's in the middle, it's not the prefrontal cortex, it's not the neocortex, it's not the primitive brain, but it's part of the limbic brain, which is our tribal brain. And this part of the brain is exploding with research right now, looking at the patterns that take place when people are either in or out of the tribe. When we're out of the tribe, we have a lot of cortisol, those two neurotransmitters we talked about. The cortisol brings fear. When it brings fear, we want people to step up, speak up, have a voice. But when we're afraid, when we're in the tribe, but we're not in the tribe, when we're not accepted in the tribe, and we feel any kind of judgment, or you're outside, then all of a sudden, we're not able to access other parts of our brain, which I'll be showing you, which is where wisdom, integrity, and insight occur. So we need, as coaches, to help figure out how to create, again, I'm going to go back to those safe spaces, because with safe space, then people can say almost anything. We can reframe, we can help them refocus, we can help them speak up. Everybody needs a voice. It's the most important thing in the world. My husband has a couple of PhDs himself, and one of the things that he studied was healthy and unhealthy cells. These are the most unusual pictures. Nobody else has seen these before. What you see on the left are unhealthy cells. What you see on the right are healthy cells. If you look at the healthy cells, you see them connecting, yes? Where the ones that's like eyes and we's connecting. The ones on the left are not. those are actually cells that are not happy with the environment that they're in. The immune system is not really helping them. And so what they're doing is they're sending up, and this is medical language, I didn't make it up. They send up little flags to say, help, I'm not happy, whatever's going on here around me is not making me happy. And so they're looking for help. And that's what that on the left it looks like. On the right, they all talk to each other, they give each other guidance, they help each other with the dialogue, the needs, and aspirations, where the cells on the left are not doing that. And so this is research that my husband did for 10 years to find what's called contact inhibition factor, which is what the cells actually need in order to talk to each other. And when they have that ability, then all of a sudden they support each other. So think of the dialogue that takes place at the cellular level. Unusual. Again, raise your hand if you think that that is kind of a fascinating view of what's going on inside of us. The person that did that is sitting down there with the red tie.
Judith, what occurs to me
Oh yes, go back. Yep.
is, I started off by talking about behavior as a function of a person in the environment. And this slide really gives us an inside view of what's happening when that environment is supported and what's happening when that environment is not. And so I think it really deepens, I think, the wisdom that Kurt Miller shared with us so many years ago, that environment is, yes, we as people are important, but the environments we find ourselves in, and importantly, the environments that we co-create with others, is equally important to the connections that we make.
Yeah, thanks, because I believe all of our work is connected through the same kind of view. How do we stay connected? How does that healthy connection look? What does it look like? And we're going to talk more about what it looks like and how to create it. But that, anytime you can connect it to other things and other people's work, please do, because it is universal. So the interaction dynamics are most important. Trust and distrust really makes all the difference in the world. Angelica DeMoca, Temple University, excuse me, it's not Columbia, but that's where they work this time. But she collected work from 102 neuroscientists to take a look at where trust and distrust live. And she had a fascinating insight, which I'll be sharing with you in a minute. But distrust lives in the lower brain, trust lives in the prefrontal cortex. But this is what she said. It's not like there's a spot that says this is trust. It's more so down here that we know distrust and fear reside in the primitive brain, but in the whole brain, for that matter. But what she said is that when we feel trust with another person, something lights up in this part of the brain. And so it's not a trust area, but it's a reward area, because we need that trust. It rewards us, it enables us to open up. So she said, again, keep in mind, it enables us. She said, however, simultaneously, uncertainty lives all the time in the brain, because so many things are happening at the same time. And so she said the brain is, and studying the brain and studying conversations in the brain is more complex than people used to say, isn't there just one spot for this? That button pushes, that button pushes, that button pushes. There are a couple buttons we're going to see that are consistent. One is called the rostro-medial prefrontal cortex. And this is called the like me, not like me part of the brain. And we're going to see that as well. So let me move forward because I jump ahead. Okay, so so assuming that something about trust lives up here, distrust lives down there, there's a lot of what I call simultaneity. So part of what I've done is created a Wikipedia of new words that help us explain when we're talking about the neuroscience or what goes on in the brain, and simultaneity is one of them. There's multiple things that happen, and some people, they always say, tell me the one spot. There are a few one spots, which we'll see. Most of the time, it's the brain working together. When there we go. When trust is high, it's prefrontal. It activates a capacity that we don't have when we're using just the neocortex. Okay, neocortex is what we know, but the prefrontal cortex is what we don't know we know, and how to access that. And when we activate this part of the brain by having trust with people, one big thing to activate trust is being transparent with people about something that's on your mind. And then they say, oh my God, they're a friend. They're sharing something with me. And then your whole relationship shifts and you have more access to this part of the brain where new ideas occur. What happens when that activates is we become more what I call wise and fit. So you can see all the things that happen. We start to access more wisdom we didn't know we had. Our integrity goes up. Strategies start to fill our brain. And this is the key, interesting new research, so I want to make sure you get this one. Empathy. And I used to think that empathy was like the high point of people connecting with each other. But when you have empathy for somebody who's not feeling good or who's been hurt, and you say, oh, I feel your pain. As soon as you say that, you are actually activating the same pain in you, because words activate the different type of neurochemistry. And all of a sudden, you feel pain and they feel pain, but you're not able to help them. You're living in the pain with them. And so compassion is a different way to pull somebody out of that pain by being able to say, how can I support you? I have compassion for you. Now you may say, oh, those words can't make such a difference. To the brain, those words do make a difference. How can I support you? Moves you in a different type of interaction dynamic that enables you to provide something for someone that is outside the pain area. It's not just feeling it, but it's now supporting them in some way. If you say, how can I help you? Help makes the other person feel that they're in trouble. But if you say, how can I support you? It's a different language. I'm wondering if this is making sense. If it is, please raise your hand. And I'm looking at you because you have a PhD in all this stuff, right?
No, I don't have my PhD yet, but I'm studying this, but my takeaway, what I've been reading and researching is compassion is taking action on empathy.
Say it for everyone. Explain.
Compassion is taking action on empathy.
Yep.
So really on empathy.
Taking action on
So
empathy.
she just made a distinction between empathy and compassion. And what he was saying is compassion really helps us really take action on that empathy that we
Right.
might be sensing. So as opposed to
That's
staying
huge.
in that space with them,
Yeah.
we're actually helping join them with compassion to be able to move out of it.
It's huge. It moves them out of just being in a state of empathy, which has pain connected to it. So here's what you can do as coaches. That's our love of life. Yes, helping people move to a higher state in some way. Yep.
Someone in the back, question or comment?
My name is Shannon Howard, and I just wanted to say, as a person of chronic pain for the last 10 years.
Okay, wait, use the mic, please.
Mike, you have the right there.
Right there.
My name is Shannon Henrich, and as a person that's had chronic pain for over 10 years and extensive, and then lost all the empathetic sensory people in my world in 2016, they all passed. So I've been out of the tribe of the toxic part, and I just have to say that what I've been learning from my new doctors and myself and the business I'm starting, special ed teacher, all of this is exactly what's been going on neurally in my body, and I've been working with a new biomedical chiropractor who we're doing all on the spine and sensory level, and so
Fantastic.
it's all completely connected. So.
Fantastic. And what I'm learning from coaches that talk to me all the time is we were told that certain things couldn't get better. But we are now seeing we know how to make them get better.
They
And
told me
it's-
I had 6 months to a year to live, and we're totally eradicating everything in this.
Oh my God.
Yeah, it's
Oh,
beautiful.
that's so wonderful. Oh my goodness.
Yeah.
Oh my goodness. That's
Thank you.
fantastic. Yep.
I understand the concept of oxytocin, and I want more of this. How can you help people stay aware and practice this? I mean, the true essence of coaching. You know, how can I make this something you want to do over and over again? Because it takes time, and they don't equate it with
So-
results.
Automatically, things start to come up quicker. It will not take the same amount of time that it used to, because our brain is now getting the right chemistry for us to come up with quick ideas. That's what I meant about this. This is what I'm seeing take place. And people say, we got a team together, we got them into level 3 conversations, and all of a sudden, they solved the problem that we've been working on for 20 years. How did that happen? Because the brain is opening up to a new space, a shared space, that is not existing of ideas that are old. Level 3 puts you in a place in your brain, literally, where you create a new, that's why creating space is the key word to take away. How do you do it? How do you make it safe? And how do you do it? You get people in a room and say, here's a challenge we've not really worked on together. This is the challenge. See what you can do. When they have old ideas there that they're pulling from this part of the brain, they're going to give you old stuff and they're not going to find the answers, and it is going to feel like it takes, X amount of time. But I've just seen teams come up with an idea at literally big companies with 365,000 employees. The top people got together and they said, let's create a safe space. Let's have it a new space with an idea that we've never really tackled before. And all of a sudden, they came up with it and they said, where'd that come from? That's the point. It's coming from the energy of the people in the room. This energy coexists. It's safe. And all of a sudden, the brain does what it wants to do, invent and create new. So,
Judith?
yeah.
I have the benefit of having seen this. One way I would comment on this as a quick preview, and then we'll get there when we get to the content, is I think people do understand kind of the difference between the anxious and the curious brain. That part I think has come together. What's been highlighted for me, however, is there are patterns that we engage in when we're in the anxious brain versus the curious brain. That's what's different. And so if I find myself repeating those patterns that actually keep me planted in the very place that I say I don't want to be, right? I think so I think what's beautiful about this frame is I now have a visual that says I can now recognize not only the state, but I could recognize the patterns that keep me locked in this space. And once I know that, I now have the opportunity for choice. What you actually see me doing is doing a dashboard, which you haven't seen, but I'm previewing for you that when we get to that part, I think you'll then begin to have a visual that says, these are the patterns I'm repeating when I'm in this space, and being in this place of fear and not enough time and incompletion, etc. So that's a bit of a preview.
Yep. So here are some of the things that have come out of this work that are patterns that we're talking about. What we discovered is that in a lot of exercises we do with clients, we use start, stop, and continue. How many of you have ever used that kind of? Yeah. Okay, so what I said is I want to interrupt a pattern of start, stop, and continue, because when you're inside the brain, you have fluid, things that move, and so it's not a start, stop, and continue. It's a downregulation or upregulation. So this is one of the things we added to the Wikipedia. On the left side are things, and it took me a long time to come up with this list, even though it looks so simple. But I wanted to link it to changes, because the changes are what is going on in the brain, in the world, faster than ever before. When I do our certification, we go through all the changes in great detail. I'm doing this quickly because I want to look at a healthy, thriving organization. Distrust lives on the left, and trust lives on the right. And so if we could downregulate excluding people, I mean, imagine if you say each one of those words, you must get what I get is that kind of gut. Ugh, I don't want that to be me. Excluded, judged, limiting in what I can do, withholding things, other people know it all, dictating, criticizing. So there's context for that. But we want to downregulate that because that is not enabling us to get to that prefrontal cortex. On the other hand, we want to upregulate, including people. I know when I read those words, do you get that feel? Yeah, I want that side. I don't want that side. I don't want chocolate, I want vanilla. Whatever you call it, you want to upregulate these words. And so part of what we look at is teaching downregulating is doing less of. Upregulating is doing more of. When leaders shift from the left to the right, when anybody shifts in a company from the left to the right, all of a sudden that neurochemistry of oxytocin starts to spew instantly, and it changes. And so that's how we get more of that chemistry to show up.
And Judith, what I like about what you said there is you're not eliminating the left, you're intentionally downshifting the left, because it's impossible to eliminate it, but you're aware that it's happening, and so you're downshifting to upshift. And that's where choice, I think, comes in.
Yeah, exactly.
And giving us some language around that.
And we as human beings, again, we're extremely mathematical, even though you don't know it, your body knows it. And so if you feel less of excluding and more of including, instantly you're feeling a different chemistry towards the people, and the room actually becomes now identified as part of that process, because external space really does make a difference too. And so here's a brain. Imagine it's yours. It's really quite beautiful. You light up the room, as you can see. And so oxytocin and cortisol, we were talking about it. It's not just oxytocin, but dopamine, serotonin. There are other types of chemicals that appear at the same time to reinforce it. on the bottom, when you see cortisol and testosterone, you know there's a power, it's there to help you. People say, is cortisol bad? Well, it could alert you to problems. So it's not that it's bad, it helps us in some cases. Bruce McEwen at Rockefeller University talks about how helpful cortisol can be to tell us there's something that we have to avoid. So I know there's lots of nuances. Something, everybody, when they're in their program, they say, just, can't you give me one word that is it, so I don't have to learn all this other stuff? No, it's getting more complex, in fact.
We wish.
We wish, yeah, exactly. Unhealthy and healthy connections. Where did it go?
Keep chatting.
Okay.
Talk among yourselves.
Talk among yourself. Any more questions that you're coming up with that you want me to answer while we're... we call this Gertrude in my world. Gertrude all of a sudden appears when I'm not fully concentrating on pushing buttons or doing things like that. It's always with the computer. I don't understand. So at least, you know, it's not my intention. Gertrude just wanted to kind of...
So I have a question.
Yes.
In order to have deep conversations and kind of make yourself available to connect with another person, that takes vulnerability.
Yep.
And my question is, have you come across anything, or what is your opinion on, can we teach and guide the behaviors that then will maybe produce vulnerability, or do we have to expect vulnerability up front?
So one of the things that I've experimented with is using reframe, refocus, and redirect. So you get a chance to say, if I have a lot of words that are conversational intelligence words, but if I double click on vulnerability, what is vulnerability? What are you bringing up? If I double click on that, tell me a little bit more.
So I'm thinking of that as kind of lowering your waterline, sharing more of yourself, being exposed. And I work in law enforcement, and I have a lieutenant that I'm working with trying to develop my staff for future promotions. And I see progress as I've been working with him for a while now. But when we talk about coaching, or for him to be coached, he kind of crosses his arms and is like, you know, I don't need that stuff. Although all the while I'm coaching him, we just, you know, I'm not as obvious about it.
So if he shows you the signals that he's having some difficulty,
Yeah.
I would double click on that one and say, wow, I realized that when I just said coaching, you were holding yourself. So
Yeah.
tell me more about that, because you know, have you done? I'm sure you've done some of those conversations, right?
A little bit, yeah.
Yeah. And what does he say back?
He just, I mean, I don't know if I could really think of the response. It's just he's resistant. He's more of a technical person, wants to know the technical answers.
Oh, I love technical people. They are the best clients in the world. And say, you know what, some of what I would love to share with you has to do with how and why things happen. And all human beings have that experience when it talks to, I have it. So then bond with him, you know, at that point and say, this is like the most important thing in the world is for us to talk about the chemistry behind what causes us to do that and give you mastery over working with your team. So if that shows up, you're going to know what to do. This is part of the coaching. I can't wait. And by the way, if you're technical, you're going to love the chemical. I always say that to them. You're going to love the patterns and the chemistry. Bingo. I have a friend for life. It's kind of, right, giving them a different way to connect with me and with the content and saying, tell me what kind of things you want to be able to do differently, and we will work through it, because there's so many great things you can do to have other people not have that. But in fact, you know, have that.
You know, there's something that when you experience what feels like resistance, right? What I saw you do just then is something that's counterintuitive, which is actually to encourage the resistance. What we often try to do is squelch it or work around it, right? But literally, when you feel resistance, doing something that's counterintuitive, just say, yeah, let's go into that, right? Because what we're conditioned to do is when someone resists, we push harder, or we try to avoid or go around. And yet resistance, if you think about it, is a natural part of the learning and change process.
It's almost an invitation.
Yes.
It's an invitation. Great,
Yes.
invitation.
So we have to be
I
willing
love that.
to
It's an
pull
invitation.
them into that
Bring people in, yeah. And also help them understand that this is universal. Every human being in every place in the world goes through this. That's what we want to, that's what we're studying together, is how to maximize our humanity with each other. So, and the more we share and the more we connect, the more that happens. I saw somebody else, yeah.
I'm interested if you can, oh, thank you. If
Put
you
it
can
up closer.
talk more about the creation of a psychological safe space. It seems more, obvious is the wrong word, but it seems like if you're working one-on-one, you could work on creating that, but there are teams that have sort of dysfunctionalities and lack of trust that go way back.
Yep.
And just saying, oh, I'm creating a safe space for you to talk,
No.
you can't.
No, we have what's called a conversational ritual for creating and setting, and the original words were rules of engagement, but a lot of people don't like rules, and so they say whatever they want to do, you know, how we're going to work together. And if you have a team, it's a fantastic way to start out and say, let's create the conditions that will help us have the best meeting possible. And I've worked with contentious groups that say they're never going to work it out and blah, 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 blah. And they come up with their own conditions. And then we check up. And by the way, sometimes people will say, oh my goodness, I realize as we're creating these that this is true, they will say, I have not been helping our group get together. I've been doing this. And they will openly say it because we create that safe space where they can actually say, it's me, and now I'm learning that I need to change. So, yeah, please. Instead of having goals and objectives as what we focus on when we get people together, I want you to write down the word aspirations. Aspire is something about the future. Aspire means to breathe life into things. So aspirations are going to come up as we go through this, the rest. So what we want to do is we want to see, I don't know if this is going to work, but whoops, that one, this little guy is not. This is what happens when human beings connect with each other and their prefrontal cortex opens up. There's an energy field that starts to take place. We don't see it, but we feel it when we interact with others. Okay, so here's two people that are coming together to speak. I want you to watch what happens. Their heads are turned away. There we go. At the moment of contact, where people are not in the same page, the not like me rostromedial prefrontal cortex activates and says to you, this person isn't like you, there's something standing in the way, and your conversation is not necessarily going to lead to the best outcomes. So you reduce sharing. That's called the TPJ, the temporoparietal junction. If you have an individual where you have that type of feeling and it has a long life because you keep talking about it, the shelf life could be as much as 26 hours, which means that you're going to go to somebody and do that, help me, you know, people are not, this person is not working well with me, so you get somebody to agree, and now you're activating it for longer and longer and longer. Sometimes you can fall into the tell, sell, yell, or addicted to being right syndrome, which is not healthy. And so what do we do about this? How do we get another view at the moment of contact? Rather than judging, rejecting, pushing, creating resistance, what else is out there? So when two people turn to each other, as we've been talking about, and set the stage for connection, where their brain waves are actually interacting with each other, take a look at what happens here at the moment of contact. The like me, not like me is giving a whole completely different message, and people then start to share much more than they would any other time. This is an actual visual that was created from actual slides of what happens when the brain, so we did this to animate it, but this is what it looks like when human beings are connecting, that you almost start to read each other's brain. It's called mirror neurons. And in this part of the brain, those mirror neurons, yes, am I getting a head shake? Yeah, this is about as close as we could get to it. And so what would your life be like? How different would it be? Raise your hand if you can envision that if you could almost mind read, or not almost, actually mind read, that your life would be different and it would be elevated in some way. Let's see if that would be something. Okay. So this is what we're looking for today, to give you some tips for how to do this and how to practice this. More oxytocin, which you now know what that is. It elevates the conversational intelligence. We need to connect and bond. It's something that all human beings do. It's something that if we don't do it, then we feel outside of the tribe. all of a sudden we get more of that cortisol. It gets in the way of us accessing new ideas, new ideas.
And as Judith makes the shift to the 5 conversational essentials, this is a step closer to how it gets operationalized. And so she's going to explore 5 conversational essentials. Be patient, sort of get them in your head. And then once you hear the 5 conversational essentials, then the dashboard makes a lot more sense.
Yeah, exactly. And when you think about the story that I told about the woman and her daughter, I gave her just 3 of the conversational essentials to use. And it created a space around this child that changed her life forever. I heard from her mother that she spoke in front of an audience of 3,600 people. Now, this is a child that couldn't speak, and she did a talk in front of that many people, and she got a standing ovation. Look, it's turning on and off things that we didn't know we had. So let's take a look. A little bit more about the neurochemistry of the essentials, and then we'll go experimenting with them. So here are conversational essentials. Priming for trust. So we say, how do we prime for trust? We make it possible to be transparent with someone. As soon as we are transparent with someone about what might have been thought of as a secret or however you want to think it, the transparency, all of a sudden, that gives us access to different parts of the brain. Ask questions for which you have no answers. Not leading questions. So much of us don't realize how many... What was that? Sound like a duck. You're welcome. Come in, join us wherever you are. Okay. Ask questions for which you have no answers, not leading questions. Listen to connect, and this is the big one that should be there. Listen to connect, not judge or reject. How much are you sitting in when people talk? Do we fall into, oh God, they didn't say that right, or I thought they were smarter? Have you ever done that in your life? No, nobody raised their hand. That's what I thought. You're all perfect. That's why you're here today, to become more perfect. Listen to connect, not judge or reject. Sustain conversational agility. We're doing a little refocus, reframe, and redirect. And the last one, which I have to say is everybody's absolute favorite. Can you guess what that is? Anybody that knows my work really, really well. It's not a test. What's the last one? Double clicking. People love double clicking, especially when you have clients that are in technology. They love double clicking. They know it, they use it. This is how we open up the whatever you double click on your computer. But double clicking is saying, going deeper in that. And usually what has happened is that what the person really wants to say is way deep. And so sometimes you have to double click and say, tell me more about that, or what is this, or you open up in a little window. Anyway, that helps make conversations be healthy, happy, fun to do. It unlocks some of the behaviors that we usually have when we go deeper and don't assume, because assuming is about the biggest challenge we all have to deal with.
Judith?
You want to talk?
No.
Please.
I
think you deserve to take over.
She has my clue. Hey, Judith.
I got it.
As we make the transition to the conversational dashboard, I've seen this several times, and yet it just occurred to me. You know that second conversational essential of asking questions for which you have no answer takes a slightly important spin as a coach, and that is oftentimes as a coach I actually do ask questions that I don't know the answer, but the client does, which in some ways is not very efficient for the client, but really forcing myself to try to ask questions for which the client doesn't have answers to, right?
Wow.
Because often as a coach,
That's
I
wow.
ask questions that I don't know the answer to, but they do, right? And if we're really talking about their agenda and moving them forward, how valuable is that for them? Maybe incredibly valuable for me as a coach. And I've heard some coaches say, why, especially in coach training, well, I have to ask that question in order to move forward. I would say check that assumption. Do you really? If you're really curious, why do you need the answer?
It also takes them down a different pathway that they never had intended to, and then it opens up a whole other journey.
Can definitely do that. So are you ready for the dashboard?
Okay, so what I had for about 10 years, I had this level 1 and level 2. And I knew it existed, but I had an empty box. And I said, I know there's something that's beyond. So level 1, let me give you the whole picture right here. This is the conversational dashboard. You can see resistor on the left. You can see co-creator on the right. We're trying to open up the prefrontal cortex. However, a lot of times it's not as accessible. This was created in a room in Hollywood with a company that I had started to work with. And I was given the top 21 people who said that they had been through 3 other consultants and they didn't want to do this again, but they'd come. And they came. And do you have things appear sometimes and you don't know where, how, why it pops up in your brain? Have you had that kind of aha moment? Nobody. Oh, come on. I know who you are. This is what you live on, right? You make those, and those become your next work, your next great work. So this popped up. I put it on a flip chart, and I asked everybody, I said, look, I want to help you co-create the future of your company today, but I'm not sure we're all in the right mindset to do that. And so I showed them this dashboard and said, where are you? And it took silence for about a minute and a half. And one guy stopped, and he said the story. We've done this before, 3 consultants, it didn't work. We're risking doing it again with you and then not having a success. I said, so where are you? It sounds like you're somewhere around. He said, I'll tell you where I am. He said, my body's resisting, but I'll be skeptical if something shows up that makes it work. He wanted a signal, he wanted a sign. And so I waited and I said, so what if we could create an environment today where everybody's working well together and that people had a chance to speak up and maybe even experiment with each other? And he said, I hardly think it's possible. I really am skeptical, but maybe I'll give it a try. Well, what do you need to give it a try? And he said, I need other people to speak up. So he didn't want to be alone. And when another person raised their hand and said where they were on the dashboard, all of a sudden the whole thing changed. In 2 days, we had 52 flip charts from a group of people who said they had no ideas, they didn't want to work together, and they were skeptical. They brought them back to their workplace. They had a long wall, and everybody who wasn't there, 80, 90 people, put up their Post-its. This organization, if you look them up, it's New Wave Entertainment. If you look them up on the web, it's now a company-owned company they had to buy a building. And everybody from Hollywood, all the 7 companies had heard, the buzz was, this place is amazing. And so their lives were changed. Again, a wonderful story. But this is the dashboard. You want to talk?
No, I'm good.
Yep.
Go ahead.
Okay.
I'm good.
No, I want, because you have such great ideas. That's why I want more.
When the feeling moves,
it moves you then.
it will happen.
Does anybody have a question about this dashboard? This dashboard goes with every company. People make it big. They put it up on the wall. Some people make pads. And people walk around. And when it seems like there's a low time, then people will talk about where they are. So it helps give them voice. And then they talk about it. And then they get everybody to help them. And then all of a sudden, things disappear.
What was insightful for me in reading Conversational Intelligence was the journey. So looking at this, I like it. It's a pretty dashboard. What really helped me is when you begin to peel behind that.
Yeah.
To say, here's what happens when you're in that level 1 space. Here's what level 2 begins to look like. Here's what shifts when you're in level 2 and level 3. So then I had a visual. Not only did I have a pretty picture, but I had visual indicators that helped me say, these are the behaviors when I'm at level 1, level 2, and when others are at level 1 and level 2, so I can begin to recognize it in myself,
Yes.
self-system, and I can begin to recognize it in others.
I love what you said because it really reminds me of why I did this. And I realized that there's some little symbols that say there are only 7 universal feelings that people have in every country that are similar. And I said to myself, these have feelings. These are feelings behind here that aren't the 7 or 6 or 5, but it adds to that.
Paul Ekman, yay. Yes.
The word co-creation isn't something that people use a lot. We've talked about collaboration as the high point. And I said, I want to raise that and challenge that and say there's something different. So if collaboration means cohorting with the enemy, that's where that word came from. It has a history, and I just read an article in New Science that says that words pull history even though we don't consciously see it. And that was a big piece of research validating why I needed to come up with a new word. And so co-creation was a new word. It actually visualizes people doing, and I'll show you a picture of it so that you can see how important. Thank you for raising that. So cortisol is here.
Thank Richard. That was his question.
Yes, thank you both. I was looking at you when I was talking to both of you. I didn't know how to do this at the same time. Okay, so transparency. How do you if you want to move from, the question is, how do you move from resistor over to co-creator? Start with something transparent. I have people do the exercise that I did with you often when I want to move a group forward because it gets them into a completely different mindset. Our words were created billions of years ago, but in the last 100 years, we are actually starting to master and understand, whether we use technology or human being, how to work with language. Language moves people to different parts of the brain. That's what it was designed for. So let's begin to access it through this. So if you can open up transparency, then resistor can take you into relationship before task. That's why it does spell the word trust, fortunately. But relationship before task. Understanding means standing under the same reality. It does not mean understanding words. When somebody says, I want to understand what you said, could you tell me what you meant by that word? That's this part of the brain that's being accessed. But once you open up transparency, we're moving into this part of our brain. It's standing under the same reality, having a shared success, and then testing assumptions. If we see gaps between your reality and mine, then how do we close those gaps? If this is on your mind when you're meeting people, you might move beyond the we don't have enough time and start setting a space where people can have conversations in a safe way. And all of a sudden, ideas happen more quickly. It makes a lot of things move faster. You're in a different state of mind. You are innovating. And you have these 3 levels, which I wanted to address as we were talking about. There are 3 levels of conversation. There's the transactional, which is tell and ask. So I meet you, I want to know something about you, I tell you about me, you tell me about you. I'm learning things about who you are, your identity, what your needs and interests are, but it's very transactional. Level 2 is positional, and these are the 2 that I knew existed. There are courses in advocation and persuasion, and they were really hot for such a long time back in the 90s. But I said, at that space, I said, I know there's something different, and that's when I wrote a dictionary for Random House. And in my research, I came up with the word co-creation. I didn't find it, I had to put it there. But it actually, all of a sudden, opened up the kind of learnings that we're sharing and looking at today.
You know, those of you who have looked at leadership theory, you see the transformational leadership where we talk about transactions and transformation. This is another sort of another layer to that work around transactional leadership, transformational leadership, and how the nature of the conversations shift when we're moving from a transactional form of leadership, i.e. through conversation, to more transformational leadership, i.e. through a different type of conversation. It literally has a different flavor, a different character, a different set of behaviors.
You know,
and climate, actually.
Based on what you just said, I'm kind of wondering, I have this urge now to, because there was a subset, transformational was co-creational at one time. Maybe that might help disengage an existing theory and make it a little bit clearer. So thank you for the opportunity to consider that. That's a big deal.
You're welcome.
Okay, I'm going to take a vote. You think we should change it to co-creation? Couple hands? Yes? Yeah, you think it might be a little bit clearer, so? Yes? Did it? Or how about a hyphen? Yeah, co-creation. Yeah, it's closer to what the interaction is, so I might consider that. I'll get all your emails, I'll send you a thing. Is that how you do it? You usually kind of get everybody? Oh, sorry, okay. So this is what it looks like, transactional, positional, and transformational level 3. This is much more of a tell and ask, and it's really learning stuff about the person. It does help in the relationship for sure. We're not saying don't do it. We're just saying depending on what you want to accomplish, then you choose the level that you want to be in. So advocate and inquire, as you see, sometimes can be that head-on where there's a win and a lose. And share and discover is that energetic field which is designed to activate and open up more of our brain's capacity, getting us into a place where we can begin to think with new ideas as opposed to continually move the chairs on the deck of ideas that we already know. This really opens up our capacity. I had this dream that we now know that more people live to be 100. And part of it is because they have the capacity physically to do it. And I'm hoping that this might add to a person's mental capacities as well. And so confirm what we know, defend what we know, and discover what we don't know. And that is what Level 3 is designed to do. And I'm sure with your backgrounds and all the things that you've learned about creating safe environments and what we're adding to today, that you'll be able to see how much different people are. I had somebody say, I had this guy, and he was an assistant, and somebody bought our company, and the company wants to make him a VP. And the guy said, how can you make him a VP? And they said, he's one of the smartest guys I've ever heard. Once they put a label on that person as assistant, he wasn't going to have a chance. But looking through people and giving them a chance to shine, we all have this capacity to become brilliant at everything that we do. So the truth about our brain's evolution is that we're designed for creating space. If one word you take away is, how do I create the safe space for aspirations and dreams to grow through conversations? The neurochemistry of aspirations is about how different conversations activate chemicals and networks that either open or close the space for our aspirations to grow.
And Judith, here I am again. So as we've looked at the conversational dashboard, just like the other two elements of the three-part conversation here, I'm sure that may have stimulated some thinking. And so let's pause and open it up for questions.
So we've talked about how to operationalize this with teams, how to operationalize this as a coach. What I'm struggling with is, as an individual, if you have an encounter with somebody, you start out on the wrong foot. Let's say you start a new job and there's somebody there that's just antagonistic and they just seem to be trying to trip you up. How can you integrate these tools to try to get a fresh start on that relationship?
I don't know, she tried to talk to him, so I don't know that part of the conversation, what worked and what didn't work. But I've had a lot of people talk about that, where they just come in and it seems scratchy, like it's not working well. And so I suggest going out to lunch and saying, I'm new, or they're new, whatever, deal with that new issue and say, I would really love to talk about how we can help each other. So you refrain from things that are sticky to how can we help each other? We're going to work together. I would love to support you in any way possible. That's the support, concept coming into play. What is it that I can do for you? And then find out if there are certain things that person likes. Maybe they like to have their door shut a lot and people are talking, or you don't know that. I mean, that's human. So just reframe it. Make sense?
And
Sure.
You may recognize what I'm about to say here, but it sounds like a characterization frame in terms of the person who is your friend or the colleague, so characterizing another person. What I have found helpful as a coach with this framework is really, because we can't see ourselves enacting level 1, level 2, level 3 behaviors, I actually use those as a reflective device to really have them look internal to see what aspect of that dynamic they may be co-creating. So go back to co-creation. Few dynamics are one-sided, and we often focus on the other dynamic without focusing on self-dynamic, right? And so I think part of the work, and what I have found useful, Judith, about your work, is personally using it as when relationships aren't working well, using it as my own diagnostic to say, where are my behaviors in terms of, am I actually co-creating the resistance? Because remember, environmental fields are often co-created. They're not created by one person. So it's much easier for me to see the object out there, which is the other person. It's much harder for me to go interior and see subject, which is me. Right? But until I can make myself object, it's really hard. So I don't know how I may be co-creating, participating in the very dynamic that I say I want to avoid. I've had tons of clients who have been in that space, including me.
So and then create that shift. Because we're thinking it's because of this, but we participated in that dance.
Right.
And where is the I part that I am participating so that I can then confront and change?
And part of what I've seen is that reflective process, using these, the conversational dashboard to help clients go internal. They generally see the insight. They say, I didn't realize what part of this I need to own.
Yep. Yep.
But what about ourselves? We're not even talking about, I wasn't even talking about the point. I mean, that's another aspect.
Right.
But what about in our?
Well, and again, as I mentioned, what I use this often for is my own self. So to me, it's like self-coaching. Is literally when I have a relationship that's not going well, because I now know that there's these dynamics, I really do use this as a self-reflective device. But anyway, this is not about me. I'll open it up to other questions. Speaking of self-awareness, you see I get absorbed and seduced.
No, that was really helpful, and it is looking itself. Also, in our house, I live with someone who is meticulous. Everything gets put away and not left around. And so we have this funny story of our dishwasher. I'd put the dishes out, and Rich would say, "You have to put them. The forks go this way, the knives go this way." I mean, he's very particular, right? And so I said, "Give me feedback. I know that you're not happy with it. Tell me what I can do to make it better for you, because I want to make it better for you." That's what we do.
I'm curious where time comes in, how that impacts getting to that level 3, especially in the coaching situation. Is that something that is, I know it can vary, but are there ranges that will tell you if you're going to get to that level at some point, or there's a time where you say it's just not going to happen?
I mean, getting to level 3, and can you
Yes.
do it quickly? Yep. Once people establish what level 3 looks like, so if you can be a role model so that they know what it is, then it takes a lot less time to get there. You establish rules of engagement. That's a ritual, conversational ritual. People know that they can put their voice in. That is 1,000% more than anything else, having the psychological safety to put their voice in. And I've had people say, "You know what? We spend way too much." This is a company that has 365,000 people. Top group, you'd say they couldn't change the company. They did. They talked and they looked at it and they analyzed, how much do we do transactional? And they said, "Oh my God, we take papers that have information and we talk about it in meetings. That's not very helpful." So gone. Then it said positional. That's important in case we have decisions to make, so we're going to leave time for that. But the most important thing is discovering new. This is a company that did 365,000 people made major changes in the company because they got into level 3. And their sessions were so fascinating to be in because they would take Post-its and put ideas that they never shared before that were radical. They thought they couldn't put there. That's where their best ideas came from. So once they see the power of this, boy, they want to go to level 3 right away. They set the rules of engagement, and they're out running with each other. It's fascinating to watch. Truthfully, I hope that helps.
It occurs to me speaking of systemic coaching, it occurs to me as a group coach. I hadn't thought about this before, a group or team coach. I can actually look at the levels of conversation to really observe sort of the dynamics of conversation that are happening in the room. And my hunch is the more people you have at level 2 and level 3, the easier it is and the quicker it is to get there. If you have a lot of energy in level 1, it's going to take a lot longer. And so you really have to focus on that. We have another question?
Yeah.
Or comment?
While I have the mic, I have one for each of you. But one is for Judy. Thank you for everything, number one. How does personality type overlay with this in terms of, like, if I think in Myers-Briggs, I'm an NF, I'd love to engage in all of this. But if I'm talking to a person that's SP, they don't care about well, I shouldn't say that so globally, but they might not naturally deeply reflect. And so how does personality type interact with it?
So could I say for personality type, if I double clicked on it to make this a quick answer, thinker, doer, intuitor, feeler, or something like that. Yeah. In 19-something, I was introduced to working with an amazing consultant that worked with accounting firms. And he said, "Let's do a thinker, doer, intuitor, feeler." And I went in and looked at what's going on, and I said, "But what you're saying is that their scores were mostly thinkers, and that they weren't feelers and they weren't intuitors." I said, "Let's throw that out. I want to find out what's in the room. I want to find out what kind of creativity is in the room, because if you think that accountants are all thinkers, which people do, that's a label that is getting in the way of finding out what they are. I said, I want to challenge them to do things that are highly innovative. Will you give me the freedom to do that? And I did it. And his mouth dropped. Because these are labels that are easy to put on, because our brain likes mathematics. And so if you show up more like a thinker, and I've done things where thinkers in that corner, go to your corner, and we've all done that, right? But it's labeling people and it's limiting people. Because I think a lot of the technical people have such phenomenally unusual ideas that we fail to tap into, because we're quick to judge. I know it all. Tell, sell, yell, addicted to being right. I get there because I get oxytocin. I have spent years in school knowing the answers and getting flooded with oxytocin when I'm getting good answers. I want new answers. I don't want the old answers, right? I can't tell you what it was like to hear a psychology teacher say, by the time you're 19 to 21, your brain has reached its capacity to learn and think. One teacher said that. I stood up and I said, you're wrong. And I almost got kicked out of the room. I was kicked out a couple times. I will not ask why. I had to stay after school and write on the blackboards. I will not ask why. Okay, go ahead.